Hey all, this is ReFantazio. I received a free copy of Metaphor ReFantazio. Like the Persona games, Metaphor is pretty long. I've heard varying accounts of how long it's taking people to beat, with 80 hours being on the upper end. Given its length and when it came out, it's likely that there are still a lot of people that haven't beaten it, so for the story sections of this review, there will be no spoilers. I will just vaguely give my thoughts. First things first, Metaphor is a Persona-like in that it has adopted the Persona calendar and social link system. What this means is that throughout the game there will be major story events, usually in the form of a large dungeon, that you need to complete by a given date. You can tackle these dungeons right away, but you're also given the freedom to do a variety of different things, such as spending time with the different social link representatives to raise their social link rank, or you can spend time doing different activities across the cities in order to raise one of your royal virtue attributes. Activities like that include listening to other races talk about their different cultures to raise your tolerance, making speeches or debating political candidates to raise your eloquence, listening to stories to raise your imagination, and so on and so on. Apart from the more social elements, you can also spend your time in side dungeons. These are smaller side areas which are not as lengthy as the main dungeon that you're supposed to do in the story. Engaging in any of these activities will move time forward. The first two will move it forward by half a day, allowing you to do an activity in the afternoon and another one at night. However, going to dungeons will take the entire day, which means you can't do them at night, and you will not be able to do a second nighttime activity once you do a dungeon. The social links are important because each social link is tied to a different archetype. Archetypes are this game's equivalent to personas, though they function more like classes since you can't swap them out mid-battle. We'll talk more about the specifics of how they function later in the video, but the important part right now is that the social links give you a variety of different gameplay benefits, especially to the archetype that each social link is tied to. Each archetype has a lineage, and there's a stronger version of that same archetype down that lineage. For example, the mage lineage starts with the mage archetype, which has stronger spells and synthesis abilities. In order to unlock it, you need to have your social link rank for that archetype high enough, and also be level 20 in the mage archetype. Social link rank also determines how many inherited skills you can put onto that archetype. In this game, any character can equip any archetype that you've unlocked, meaning that you can set up your party however you want. Each archetype has different skills that it comes with, and you can inherit those skills onto whatever archetype you're currently using. For example, if you unlocked the mage archetype and have leveled up enough in mage to have a thunder ability, you can inherit that skill onto any other archetype that you're playing. As you level up your social link rank, you can inherit more and more skills up to a maximum of 4. You have a strong incentive to specialize, since you can't upgrade to the next tier of archetype until you've maxed the previous one, but there may be some specific skills from other archetypes that you really want to inherit, and so you'll want to pour some effort into upgrading them as well, even if you won't be using them primarily. One very welcome change is that social links now advance to the next rank anytime you are able to interact with these characters. In Persona, there was some kind of hidden meter, and you needed to talk to the character a certain amount of times before you were able to have a conversation that would increase your social link rank. Even worse, there were dialogue options that you could choose during these social link interactions that the other character would like. Correctly choosing that answer would decrease the number of times you need to hang out with that character before they have their next social link rank up. In previous Persona games, it could be difficult to get everything done by the end of the game, get all of your social link ranks to max. And because it was difficult, there are people that played with a guide open that would tell them which answer is correct, and in this way they could minimize the amount of days wasted having meaningless conversations with the character before the social link rank up. In Metaphor, not only is each conversation a guaranteed rank up, but the answers that you can give the characters during these interactions only reward Magla, a much less important resource, and not the kind of thing that would compel players to either play with a guide open or reloading saves every time they get the wrong answer. Social links also have the typical non-gameplay benefits of just letting you interact with the characters. Each rank of the social link will have you talking to the character and will make up an event in a larger arc that will culminate and conclude at social link rank 8. Royal Virtues, on the other hand, don't have gameplay benefits. What they do is stop you from accessing certain services and progressing through your social links. At some point, your social links will want to talk to you, but will require that you have a certain amount of tolerance or wisdom or imagination, meaning you'll have to spend days doing activities that upgrade those stats. If there's a social link that needs a specific stat, then it's a good idea to rank that one up before you do the others. Finally, the dungeons. The dungeons are a bit of a new addition in the Persona formula. Because the main dungeon that you have to do before the deadline is so lengthy in comparison to these smaller side dungeons, you can, and the game encourages you to, go to the side areas to increase your level before you tackle the main dungeon. This will let you get levels, it'll let you get rewards, let you get gear that's better than what you can purchase at the shop sometimes. And these dungeons are tied to quests, and the quests themselves will have rewards, be it money or points into one of your royal virtues. A cool thing about these dungeons is that some of them are so far away from the main city that it'll take more than one day to get there. And sometimes there will even be several dungeons in one direction, meaning that you'll have to plan out your trips. There are also parts of the social link that will only happen while traveling in the Gauntlet Runner. The Gauntlet Runner itself has a variety of different activities that you can do, so while you're in transit you can talk to party members outside of a social link rank up, and that will increase your royal virtues. You can also increase your royal virtues by reading books, with the added benefit that when you finish the book it'll give you a further boost to that virtue. The side dungeons and maps are kind of simple and samey, but oddly enough I don't hate them. They are interesting. They're not great dungeons, they're not fantastic dungeons, but many of them do have multiple floors, secret areas. There are numerous times where I see a treasure chest that I can't immediately get to, and I have to figure out how to get to it. They're quite fine, and that's good enough for me since I was kind of expecting bad dungeons, especially for these side areas. The last Atlas game that I played was Shin Megami Tensei 5 and Vengeance, and the dungeons introduced into those areas were terrible. So in my opinion, these are just a big improvement. The Persona calendar system works really well in Metaphor, although that may not have anything to do with Metaphor. I think the calendar system is just fun. It's fun to try and be efficient with the days that you have, to make meaningful choices between engaging in social link activities, or raising your royal virtue attributes, or going to side dungeons in preparation for the main dungeon later on. The press turn system works this way. Your party gets one turn per character, but if you hit an enemy physical or elemental weakness, or get a critical hit, you get one additional turn, which means that you could get a maximum of 8 turns. If, however, your attack misses or gets nullified, then you lose 2 turns. And the same goes for your enemies. If they take advantage of your elemental weaknesses or get critical hits, they will also get additional turns. There is a change to the press turn system from how it worked in Shin Megami Tensei 5 and Vengeance. In those games, if you pass, it'll turn your icon into a bonus icon in the same way as hitting an enemy weakness. And you could keep passing and continue getting the bonus icons as long as you had any normal icons left. Once you ran out of normal turns, it would start taking the half turns when you passed. But in Metaphor there's an added restriction. It will only create a bonus turn if there are currently no bonus turns. If you do have any bonus turns and you choose to pass, it will instead deplete one of those bonus turns rather than creating a new bonus turn, which I think is a very good change. The most interesting addition to Metaphor's combat is the synergy skills. Each archetype will have the ability to use different synergy skills. These are powerful skills that take multiple turn slots and that require you to have other specific archetypes in the party. If you don't have those other archetypes in the party, then you won't be able to use the synthesis skill. Interestingly, if you land a critical hit, or hit an enemy weakness with one of these skills, it will create a bonus turn for every turn that it required you to use. The combat is fun, especially with bosses that will let you really make use of the strategies that you've assembled. But I do think there are a few problems with it. First of all, I think the combat is very easy. I was playing in hard mode and I was taking care not to grind for things, so when I enter a side dungeon or the main dungeon, I'm basically only killing the enemies one time. I was thorough in my exploration, but I wasn't trying to go out of my way to kill things for experience. And I think this had some negative effects on the main dungeons. The thing I like about Persona dungeons is that they are lengthy, and you're encouraged to be efficient about clearing them. Because of the way the calendar system works, you want to get them done in one day, if possible. Because of that, you want to carefully manage your magic points, so that they last you throughout the entire dungeon, all of the mini-bosses in the dungeon, and the final boss at the end. I enjoy the resource management element in the lengthier dungeons. In fact, I think it's crucial to their appeal. But with how it works in Metaphor, the resource management tension is greatly reduced. This is primarily for 2 reasons. The open-world battle system that has you instantly destroy enemies if they're of sufficiently lower level, and the ambush system tied to that action combat if you manage to knock the enemy down. I get the logic of destroying instantly lower level enemies once your party gets to a high enough level, since these are battles that you would have won fairly easily anyway, and so it's trying to save your time. And I don't really mind systems like that in other games, but it has a detrimental effect in things like Persona games with these dungeons specifically. Because the dungeon is supposed to drain you of your resources over a long period. You're encouraged by all of the game systems to get as far as you can in a single day. And if you couldn't instantly kill a lot of these enemies, if you were forced to engage with them in squad battle, they would be slowly draining your resources over a longer period. This would happen for a lot of reasons. Because you'd have to use magic or skills to deal with them quickly. Because the first time that you see an enemy, you might not know its elemental or physical weaknesses, and you'd have to experiment hitting different elemental weaknesses until you get the right one. And you'd have to repeat that process every time a new enemy shows up, and these dungeons do, to their credit, have a wide selection of new enemies you often see. Also, engaging in squad battles increases the potential of enemies hitting you, causing you and your allies to take damage that you will have to heal with more MP resources. But with minor enemies being instantly killed, all of that tension is gone, the mechanics that would reduce your resources over a longer period are heavily reduced, and in the worst cases they're completely reduced for most of the dungeon. If you choose to do as the game suggests and go to all of the smaller side dungeons before you tackle the main dungeon, you'll find that most of the enemies in the dungeon, the main dungeon, will be considered chaff. In the second dungeon I remember there was almost no enemy that I had to fight in squad battle, making the dungeon go by very quickly and with almost no MP resources used on my end. Which brings us to the ambush system. In the action combat, if you knock an enemy down and then immediately go into squad battle, the enemy will be at a disadvantage. You'll start off by doing like 20% of their total HP and damage. It's not an exact number, it just seems to be around 20%. The enemies will also be stunned. They won't be able to dodge while they're in this stunned state. And if they're still stunned by the end of the turn, then they won't be able to take any action in the following turn. Though there is a chance that they can come out of the stun if you hit them. My problem with it is that the action combat is actually very easy to pull off, and the advantage that you get on the enemy is really big. Which means that even in situations where they're not just mob enemies and you actually do have to engage them in squad battle, most of the time those enemies won't even get a turn and you can efficiently deal with them with minimal MP usage. Since the ones that are still stunned are going to not be able to attack in the following turn, you can focus on half of them, make sure those are dead, and then in the subsequent turn finish off the rest, ensuring that nobody gets a chance to act other than you. I hope this is not a trend that will continue into Persona 6. I don't mind the action combat exactly, but action combat or not, I don't think that you should be able to immediately kill low-level enemies, and I don't think that the advantages for ambush should be so high. Not when resource management is a key part of what makes these dungeons fun. Let's vaguely talk about the story. I'll be mindful to keep it spoiler-free. The premise of Metaphor is that following the king's assassination, he invokes royal magic to create a magical election, and at the end of it, whoever has more of the people's support will become king. While this election is going on, you have your own goals, and to further those goals, you become a candidate. The story will take you to several different cities in the kingdom. You'll learn about the different tribes and the tensions between them. You'll have the chance to interact with and talk to your election rivals, and there will be plenty to immerse you in the world setting and its lore. I think the story starts off very strong, and it manages to keep that strength for most of the playthrough. For the most part, the companion characters are good, their interactions are good, their social links and social events are nice. Of special interest was Haizme. His storyline revolves around his role as a father to a dead son, and I thought it was unusually compelling. Another highlight is Gallica, your fairy companion. She's a simple character, but she's so friendly and helpful throughout the whole campaign, and the delivery of her voice sounds so sincere, I can't help but like her a lot. All of the characters, including the villains, are elevated by their pretty good voice acting. In fact, I would probably go so far as to say this is the best English voice acting cast they've ever had. A couple other details that I think are really good is the soundtrack and the character portrait art. At this point it goes without saying, the music and the art in these Atlus games is always really unique and outstanding. But even given those standards, I think Metaphor stands out. I'm kind of looking forward to seeing Metaphor at the Game Awards. I hope it's nominated for Game of the Year. Not because I have any interest in it winning, but because I would really like to see its song in the big compilation they have. It would also be nice if it won Best Soundtrack, though I think it has some competition. Final Fantasy Rebirth does have some very nice songs. Now, the music and the art and the premise of the competition create a really nice atmosphere that I think lasts for most of the campaign, about 3/4 of the campaign. However, that last fourth of the campaign was really rough. The election premise of the story stops being important or relevant. The mysteries and motivations surrounding several characters ended up having resolutions that I thought were not satisfying. And the last month or two of the in-game calendar was an incredible slog to get through. In that last month, I had to force myself to complete the game. I was fairly disappointed with the story, which really damaged the interest I had in completing a lot of the in-game activities that were left. I'm a very story-motivated person, and the fact that I wasn't thrilled about what was going on in the story harmed my ability to enjoy the quests and social links I still had to do. Another thing I disliked is that I had plenty of time to do everything in the game. The efficiency I had been practicing previously in getting through the dungeons in 1 day and trying to be efficient in what I choose to do put me in a position where I had nothing left to do for half a month. The reason I dislike this isn't because I think you shouldn't be able to do everything in one playthrough. I think you should be able to do everything in one playthrough. My problem is with the amount of leeway that they've given you. I think it's way too much. As it stands, almost everyone's going to be able to do everything if they want to. I still think there should be some leeway. There has to be a middle ground between having to consult a guide and having to do everything in a very specific way to be able to do everything in one playthrough, and Metaphor's approach, where almost everyone will be able to complete everything if they want to. I'm in favor of the leeway. I want to be able to do everything in one playthrough. I just happen to think that this is a little too much. I still need the tension from the idea that I might not be able to make it if I make too many continuous bad choices. That looming threat is one of the reasons why the calendar time management system is fun in the first place. And if you at the end realize that it's largely illusory, then it makes the choices that you made feel unimportant. While I do think that Metaphor stumbles at the end, I still liked the game. I just think that many of the other reviews that I've seen regarding its ending and its story are a bit overblown. I was not as impressed as a lot of other people seem to be. Now, if you haven't finished the game, you should consider this the end of the review. But I do want to talk more explicitly about the ending and what the game is trying to say. And so this last section will not be spoiler-free. It'll be my interpretation of what's going on in the story and what it means. Consider this your spoiler warning. Please do not continue if you haven't finished the game. There will be ending spoilers. Unsurprisingly, the game is metaphorical. What is surprising, though, is that it's not a metaphor for politics. It is not prescribing a specific political ideology as the solution for our problems. In fact, the point it's making is kind of the opposite of that. So let me just paint you a picture. You have Katharina's social link. And Katharina's not just a social link, she's also a candidate in the tournament. She entered the competition to help the Parapus and other minority tribes. Her original platform is among the more extreme ones, being basically kill the rich and take their money. Unfortunately for her, her followers kind of took her seriously and started actually attacking rich people and stealing their money. The rest of her social link involves her dropping out of the race and going to stop them from doing that. There's an event where one of her former constituents tells her, "You told us to go kill the rich." And then Katharina says, "Yeah, and I shouldn't have done that." So the game is explicitly against violent political change through force, especially since Luis is the main bad guy, and Gallica says the following to him. "You refuse to believe in dreams. That's why you can't believe in anything that's gradual, complicated, and slow to change. You'll never beat us. You're nothing but a coward trying to escape this reality for one you made up." Apart from Luis and Katharina, there's not many contestants that have anything that resemble a coherent political ideology. I guess maybe Roger. He's like a laissez-faire, taxes or theft kind of guy. But neither he nor any of the other candidates are treated with any kind of seriousness or importance. So it's not about specific political ideologies. What it's about is this. You find out that the royal magic works because the people's anxieties are pointed towards their king, and the royal scepter absorbs that anxiety, giving the king nearly infinite godlike power. Moore, who is the king, says the following. "In the end, people don't want their world to change. They just want someone to be a sponge for their infinite anxieties. That's all." You can't blame Luis for wanting to end that cycle. How could anyone accept that they lived in a world that miserable? Luis echoes that and says, "To burden others with your own fears and responsibilities is cowardice. My royal magic shall craft a world where that cannot be. Such cowardice dies." So the metaphor here is that people direct their anxiety towards their ruler. They put their anxieties and responsibilities and hopes onto their king. It is the reason that they're miserable, and it's also the reason why the king has so much power. And so Moore, who is the previous king, is studying archetypes. Archetypes are true magic that anybody can use. You get your archetype, you create magic by facing your anxieties and overcoming it. You're not foisting the responsibility off to your political leader. It is not his job to deal with your anxiety. It is your job to deal with your anxiety. And by overcoming it, you embody the hero kings of old. And if you do not, then what will happen is that you emit magla, which works like a kind of pollution affecting everything. Your fears and anxieties pollute the environment around you. It leads to melancholia, makes everything worse for everyone. It makes the king lose faith in his people, and the people lose faith in their king. And so the solution to the problem is more local. The difference between your party and Luis is that you help people overcome their anxiety. That's what's shown throughout the various social link interactions. But Luis doesn't believe people deserve help, so he will return the anxiety that people sent to the royal scepter back to them, and if they aren't strong enough to overcome it, he doesn't care. So that's what I think Metaphor's about. That's the metaphor of the game, which I think is actually very interesting. Atlas always plays with very interesting premises and endings. I think the same thing of Shin Megami Tensei 5 and Vengeance. But similarly to Vengeance, I just don't like the delivery vehicle that they used, which is the story. And that's the end of this video. As always, thank you very much for watching.